Welcome once again to Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific, brought to you by our producer, IEJ Media, and our sponsor, Bauer Group Asia. More about them in due course. I am Ray Powell. I'm the former military officer here in California. Over there in New York is James Carouso. He is the former diplomat. Jim, how are you?
Well, you called me James, so I don't know why we're being so formal, but good to see you, Raymond.
You're in trouble. So we have with us Hanako Montgomery, CNN's Tokyo-based international correspondent, to discuss the historic ascendance of Sanae Takaichi as Japan's first female prime minister. Hanako joined CNN in 2023 after working at Vice News and covers Japanese politics and society with deep expertise in regional developments across Asia. Takaichi's parliamentary election this week marks a significant milestone as the 64-year-old economic security minister and political ally of the late Shinzo Abe takes the helm during a period of transition for Japan's ruling party. Now, Takaichi is Japan's fourth prime minister since Shinzo Abe stepped down 5 years ago. So, Hanako, who is she and why should we care about her?
Yeah, so Sanae Takaichi is actually a very colorful politician, far more colorful than the last couple of prime ministers we've had. She started out her career in the mid-90s, and before that, she was actually a TV anchor. So she would regularly go on TV shows and talk about politics, talk about Japanese society. Unlike a lot of her male counterparts, she doesn't hail from a political dynasty. So her mother was a police officer. Her father worked for a car company. And one funny anecdote that I love to share with my editors and my colleagues is that she loves motorcycles. She loves heavy metal. She could ride a motorcycle for many years, but had to give it up when she started her political career because she didn't want to get into any accidents that would actually prevent her from working. So you can kind of tell she has a very strong work ethic. She refers to herself also as a workaholic. But she is and has been a lawmaker in Japan's ruling party for nearly 3 decades. And she has a lot of political experience. She's previously served in the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's cabinet. She was also in the Kishida. And most recently, she was the economic security minister. Now, in Japan, she's very well known as a conservative politician, someone who is referred to as Abe's protégé. So she, for instance, supports revising Japan's pacifist constitution. She supports boosting Japan's defense spending. She supports looser fiscal policies. In terms of social issues, she does not, for instance, support same-sex marriage and has more traditional beliefs when it comes to women. So again, she's a very colorful character and one that is quite complicated as an individual and certainly fascinating to report about.
So, as Ray mentioned, we've been through 4 prime ministers in the past 5 years. Do you expect this one to last a little longer?
Well, I think the ruling party would certainly want her to last longer, especially given the fact that the LDP's longtime coalition partner, the Komeito, split from the party, right? They were with the LDP for 26 years, but they recently split after Takaichi became the president of the LDP. And they had to scramble and find a new coalition partner before this parliamentary vote. Otherwise, it was very unlikely and it was going to be difficult for Takaichi to actually be voted in as prime minister. I think the LDP is very much at a crossroads as a party. It's having a bit of an identity crisis. And we saw that during the presidential vote for the LDP, right? Takaichi, one candidate who represented going back to the LDP's old traditional conservative roots. And then the other, specifically, Shinjiro Koizumi, who is younger. He represents a new generation for the party. He was also a favorite to win. He was actually more favored to win than Takaichi. But we saw the LDP choose Takaichi. So certainly that means they think that having a more traditional, having a more conservative president of the party, more conservative prime minister of Japan would mean that she's more popular among the public and that she would actually be able to rule Japan for far longer than her predecessors, who did lean more towards center left within the party.
So, of course, when you have a conservative woman come along as the first female prime minister, it couldn't help but evoke from the West comparisons to Margaret Thatcher. And so the Iron Lady term has come out, as have, of course, other terms like hardliner and ultra-conservative. How do we think about her, especially in a Japanese sense? Because, of course, this is a big moment for Japan.
Yeah, I love that question because she also, I think, would love the comparison between herself and Margaret Thatcher, right? Margaret Thatcher is her self declared role model. They're not really that similar in terms of policies. They are similar in terms of symbolism, right? First female prime minister, strong leaders, right? They're known to be very strong in their beliefs and the way they speak, right? They have a very deliberate way of speaking. But, as you mentioned, right, Takaichi is the first female prime minister of Japan. That is really big news for the country. It's deeply patriarchal, especially when it comes to politics. I think the World Economic Forum's most recent gender gap index survey ranked Japan the lowest among G7 nations when it comes to gender parity. And in terms of politics and the economy, Japan consistently ranks very, very low. So the fact that the ruling party and the parliament of Japan voted for a female prime minister is very significant, right? Uh, at CNN, we reported that she has broken the political glass ceiling. But again, as you mentioned, she's been criticized for having more conservative beliefs, for perhaps not necessarily championing women's rights issues throughout her career. I do think it's important to note that her career spans nearly 3 decades, and she was able to get to the tippy top of Japanese politics as a woman in a very male dominated space, right? So that has to be acknowledged as having a massive, massive achievement, right, for her career. I think also, some experts I've spoken to say that in order to get to where she is today, she's almost to in a quote unquote strip herself of her more feminine values, of her more women's rights issues or centered politics to make it in a man's world. And I think also of her generation, right? She comes from the Showa era, which is uh, really two, I suppose, generations ago within Japan. And the Showa era and is very different from the modern day Reiwa woman. So I think her rise is complicated, but as you mentioned, it's historic, and I think that shouldn't be taken lightly for Japan.
So Takeichi's been called an acolyte of Abe, or he was her mentor, or something of that sort. Do you see her policies basically following Abe's policies, or is she going to be more conservative, as seems to be the scuttlebutt?
Mm, I think she has compared herself to Shinzo Abe because it's an easy shorthand, right? Many people in the West and internationally know who Shinzo Abe was. He was quite well known. He was pretty good at foreign policy. Takaichi, on the other hand, has no experience when it comes to foreign policy. Social issues, for instance, revising the Japanese constitution, also when it comes to defense, she does see pretty eye to eye with Shinzo Abe. I think the most recent reporting that I've seen in Japanese local media is that she wants to boost defense spending to 2% of Japan's GDP by the end of this fiscal year, which is pretty ambitious. And again, revising the Japanese constitution is, a policy in a way of, I suppose, campaigning and thinking that some more conservative members within the LDP have long pushed for. In terms of the economy, she has said that she's going to push for something called Sanaenomics, so a play on words from Abenomics. And her fiscal policies don't necessarily look exactly like Abe's, right? She's pushing for looser fiscal policies. She pushes for bigger government spending. She also wants to tackle inflation, which is an issue that Abe didn't really deal with, right? We didn't see super high living costs in Japan while he was prime minister. She, for instance, has suggested uh, really releasing or just, I suppose, pushing a bill, I think worth billions of dollars that would help alleviate some concerns within the Japanese public when it comes to lower house care or household items, right? So to really help alleviate the living crisis or the cost of living crisis in Japan. So I think when it comes to the economy, she is trying to push forward a new way of ruling Japan that we didn't see with Abe. How much of that she'll be able to actually implement, we'll have to see, given that this is given that the LDP is now ruling with a completely new coalition partner.
So one of the first indications we usually get about how a new prime minister is perceived is markets will react. So how are markets reacting to the prospect of Sanae?
Yeah, so we saw actually Japan's benchmark index, right, the Nikkei 225 do very well, reaching very high values, perhaps, achieving a record within Japan, especially right after her election. And I think you can see investors were quite excited about her election, given her looser fiscal spending and her policies about government bonds. Um, the yen, though, on the other hand, we've seen weaken while she was elected as the president of the LDP. It was at one point trading at 153 yen to the dollar. It's now reversed a little bit slightly. It's now 151 yen to the dollar. The weakening of the yen, that could potentially be just a brief moment, right? It could potentially be that the yen goes back to its higher value against the greenback, or perhaps with her looser fiscal spending, with what she plans to do with rates, we could see that depreciating even more. We could see the yen depreciate even more. One thing I do want to know is her coalition partner, Nippon Ishin no Kai, or Japan Innovation Party, has completely opposite views when it comes to fiscal policy. So they don't actually really support looser fiscal policies. They don't really see a value in huge government spending. So how much of Sanae she's actually going to be implementing is really difficult to tell. Also, the Japan Innovation Party, for instance, they really value the Bank of Japan being independent from the government, which again, she doesn't really see eye to eye on.
Mm.
So I think her, finance minister, the woman she's tapped to be her finance minister, and how much the LDP rules with the coalition is going to really determine Sanae and the way it will look within Japan and also globally.
Do the coalition partners have any cabinet seats?
No, no, no. It's majority. It's the LDP. And one interesting thing about her cabinet actually is that she vowed at one point to have Nordic levels of female representation in her cabinet if the women were qualified enough. And of course, she's only appointed two women in her cabinet. She was actually asked about this in a press conference, right? You once promised an extreme amount of female representation. I think some local media reports and pundits were saying maybe we could see a record number of women in the Japanese cabinet. But she said, you know, I'm not choosing anyone because they're a woman. I'm not choosing anyone because they're a man. I'm only choosing people because they're qualified for the job. So that was, I think, the biggest surprise about her cabinet, and also some new faces as well. Some people who have never served in the cabinet.
So, of course, one of the ongoing geopolitical situations that she'll have to face right away will be the trade situation with the United States. And, of course, the United States' apparent, sort of interest in other parts of the world, shall we say, than in previous administrations, even the first Trump administration. So we've seen a greater interest in the Middle East and South America, and maybe a little bit of a disinterest in East Asia. How do you think she might approach that, especially given the fact that she's supposed to be meeting Donald Trump very soon?
Yes, very soon, actually, days away, which will be a very, very, very big test for her. So, some of the things that she said about foreign policy, right, and what she hopes to achieve in terms of forming strategic alliances with other countries in the region, she's floated the idea of Japan needing to create alliances that don't center around the United States, that don't necessarily involve the US. So, what that means is Japan could, for instance, form better ties with South Korea, could form better ties with the Philippines, Australia, right? And not necessarily look to the United States when it comes to what that alliance will look like. Also, interestingly, uh, when I was just researching Takaichi, she, of course, has pretty friendly ties with Taiwan, a self governing island that China claims as its own. And this will be certainly an interesting development to look at, especially when she goes to APEC, right? Goes to ASEAN, and we expect potentially she could meet Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier. And, her ties with Taiwan, for example, she visited earlier in April. And when she met the president of Taiwan, she discussed the importance of Japan, Taiwan, and other powers around the world to develop security cooperation. And of course, that ruffled a lot of feathers in Taiwan, in China, because, the nature of how they view Taiwan, right? How they view cooperation with Taiwan. So, when Takaichi really goes out and engages in diplomacy, meets other powers within the region, we're really going to have to see how she mentions the United States, whether she will consistently look to the US to formulate these policies, or whether she will truly go out and seek these meetings on her own, seek these security alliances on her own. We did see a little bit of that. We heard mentions of that during the Ishiba administration, right? Because he was the first Japanese prime minister under Trump. We didn't see that much of that during the Biden administration, obviously, given the context of the new administration. The Biden administration was very much deeply saw the value of the Indo-Pacific region. So I think, that has potentially, or that will potentially remain consistent throughout Japanese politics. We could potentially see, even if, for instance, Takaichi does not serve for a very long time, her successor will also pursue the same goals of formulating the security alliances, making them much stronger without thinking of the United States as the centerpiece.
So more of a matrix rather than the hub and spoke, which is something the Biden administration certainly pushed.
Correct. Yeah.
I'm sure Ray will be no doubt asking more about China's reaction to her election, but I'm more interested right now in the meeting with Trump.
Yeah.
Japan nominally has a trade agreement that was negotiated by her Takaichi's predecessor, Ichiba, which includes a supposed promise of $550 billion investments in the U.S. that Trump may not direct. Is this going to be the issue that's going to be discussed at their meeting? And what does Takaichi want from this meeting with Trump?
Mm. I think at this meeting, that $550 billion deal will certainly be brought up, given the fact that Takaichi has discussed revising it potentially and revisiting it, seeing, just whether they can hash out more details, how much investment will go where, right? Because the details are still a bit hazy. We don't exactly know, uh, how it'll be rolled out, what it would look like. So that can certainly cause headaches. It's important to note that the politician who was really involved in those trade agreements and trade deals with the United States, Akazawa, he's part of Takaichi's cabinet now. So it looks as though she's trying to tap the same people who initially uh, managed that deal under the Ishiba administration. I think with the trade agreement, also what we will see come up is Japan's policies about Russian liquefied natural gas, right? This has been something that the Trump administration has continued to discuss, wanting Japan, wanting other allies of the United States to sort of wean themselves off of Russian LNG. For Japan, which is a very resource lacking country and needs a lot of energy from abroad, Russian LNG has been quite cheap for the country. But of course, given the fact that Japan's biggest security ally and biggest just geopolitical allies is the United States, we could potentially see Takaichi try to strike a deal here. Say, for instance, just buying less of Russian LNG, perhaps gradually reducing the amount that Japan imports. So I would watch out for that as well when it comes to the economy. And out of her meeting with Trump, I think, given how much Takaichi has emphasized bringing Japan's economy back, how much she's emphasized wanting to build Japan as a stronger nation, I think it will be a successful meeting if Takaichi is able to forge a better alliance with Trump when it comes to the economy, right? So whether that means hashing out more details when it comes to that investment deal, whether it means, developing policies where she's finally able to see eye to eye with Trump about Russian LNG. I think we'll see something like that. If that meeting is successful. I think also, though, because this is really her first foreign policy test, her first official one-on-one meeting with Trump, I think whether or not the two leaders just get along would be a huge test, right? Um, Many of the experts I've spoken to have said that we'll likely see her appealing the fact that she was very close to Shinzo Abe, and Abe had a very good relationship with Trump. Whether or not Abe liked Trump is another discussion altogether, but they should have a very good relationship. So I think just being able to maybe even get on a first name basis with Trump is going to be a huge, huge goal of hers, and just dealing with its more mercurial and unpredictable nature.
So one of the sort of remarkable breakthroughs of the late Biden administration was kind of the rapprochement with South Korea, and obviously there have been some ups and downs since then. But one of the things that Takaichi has done is made some regular visits to the Yasukuni Shrine, which is one of those sort of sore rub points with South Korea. So just sort of I guess a little bit of a complicated question, trying to unpack this for our audience. Why is it such a fraught relationship with South Korea? What is the Yasukuni Shrine? And how do you think she'll approach South Korea moving forward?
Yes. Where do I begin? So it's a complicated relationship with South Korea because she, in the past, has not necessarily seen eye to eye with South Korea in terms of what happened during World War II. Right. She, as you mentioned, is a regular visitor to the Yasukuni Shrine, which is a controversial shrine because some of Japan's war dead are buried there, but also some war criminals, right? Convicted war criminals are buried there. And of course, South Korea and China, given what happened during World War II, given Japan's, you know, brutal killings in those two countries and its colonization of those two countries during the Second World War. They feel very strongly about the fact that many Japanese politicians, powerful politicians, and in the past, prime ministers have continued to visit the shrine and honor those people buried there. So, just going back to Takaichi and her complicated relationship with South Korea, she has previously criticized the narrative that we hear about comfort women in South Korea, right, which is a hugely sensitive issue between the two countries. You know, not including Takaichi, right? We've seen that issue come up multiple times in terms of diplomacy. Also, of course, the islands that Japan and both South Korea claimed. And this is a similar issue we see with China and the Senkaku Islands. So it's a very complicated relationship. There are some things that Japan and South Korea certainly have not come to really an exact agreement upon, especially about the past. I think one of the reasons why we might potentially see tensions being fraught again is because Takaichi does have such a different view about what happened during World War II, has a very different understanding of how Japan should view its history compared to perhaps her predecessor. But some of my sources say that she could potentially lead with more pragmatism while she's in office, given that in the region right now, South Korea and Japan are allies, perhaps maybe more out of necessity, right? You have North Korea, you have Russia, you have China, these three powers that have nuclear weapons that Japan and South Korea really need to cooperate and coordinate with each other on to protect their own countries, to protect their own security. So, it might be a relationship that we could see being complicated given her past remarks, given her past beliefs, or they could try to set that aside, perhaps not talk about that too much, right? Sort of ignore it, and then really focus on what's happening now, focus on the security issues happening now. Um, a fun, silly anecdote, a Korean reporter asked her during her first press conference as prime minister, things about South Korea. And she mentioned that she loves South Korean cosmetics, seaweed and South Korean food. So she really likes South Korea as a country and said that she would try to continue her diplomacy and her work with South Korea. So, I think we'll have to see just exactly how close Japan and South Korea will continue to be under her administration.
Okay, so many of the things you were talking about, South Korea's concerns about Japan, can be doubled for China, especially as you mentioned, given Takaichi's relationship with Taiwan. What has China's reaction been so far? And is there a way she can smooth over relations, do you think?
Mm. Notably, when she became the president of the LDP, Chinese state media released this article that said Japan is at a crossroads. And with Takaichi's leadership, they raised a lot of concerns about her relationship with Taiwan, her relationship with China, given her past remarks about the country in the past. Uh, Takaichi, for example, has said that Chinese residents in Japan have a duty to aid Chinese espionage. She's repeatedly criticized the country for its growing militarization in the Indo-Pacific region. She's also, at one point, blamed Chinese tourists for kicking deer, which are very sacred in her home prefecture of Nara. So she has very strong feelings about China. She's very hawkish when it comes to China. And I think that will be a lot of that will raise a lot of questions, and I think her administration will probably be quite concerned when it comes to that. What exactly will perspire when she meets Xi Jinping and when Japan does engage in diplomacy with China? And of course, Taiwan is a huge, huge part of that, right? Um, Under the Abe administration, we also saw Japan having pretty good ties with Taiwan, more so after he left his official position as prime minister. And again, Takaichi has visited Taiwan most recently in April, discussed the need for Japan and Taiwan to have defense cooperation, not including the United States. They also mentioned, having stronger interpersonal relations, also stronger cooperation when it comes to the economy. And China, of course, whenever other countries engage in diplomacy with Taiwan, they're furious about it. They don't support it, right? So the fact that Takaichi has a relationship with Taiwan, the fact that she has visited the island before and has a relationship with the president there is certainly something that China will bring up. We don't know if she's going to continue those visits now that she is prime minister. We don't know if she'll actually deliver when it comes to that defense, cooperation with Taiwan. But I think that's something that China will certainly watch for. One thing to note, though, is her visit to, for instance, the Yasukuni Shrine. She did not go during its autumn festival. She wasn't yet prime minister. She was the president of the LDP. Notably, though, she's visited very regularly in the past few years. She's visited every single year, but she chose not to visit when she was the president of the LDP, perhaps to sort of reduce the temperature in the room, right? Reduce the tensions with China and South Korea. I think also an important thing to note here about China is that it's Japan's biggest economic partner, right? It does the most business with China. For Japan to lose China, for Japan to have a fraught relationship with China could be very, very expensive. And Takaichi has time and time again said how important the economy is for Japan, how many problems the Japanese economy currently faces, and how much she wants to solve those issues. So, again, the experts I've spoken to say she might lead with more pragmatism, that she might not be as salacious in her comments when it comes to China. But I think we're going to see that first test really next week during APEC and ASEAN.
So let's bring it back home again domestically. You talked about the economy and the importance of the economy, and we talked earlier about whether or not she will be a long-term prime minister. Obviously, Shinzo Abe was extremely long-term, but we haven't had one since. Um, what do you think is the future of the Liberal Democratic Party? What I mean, obviously the LDP has been at the center of Japanese politics for a very long time, largely uninterrupted. Um, what I mean, is it at a bit of an inflection point? Is it a crisis point? Could it begin to lose its hold on power?
Mm, I think we're realistically, I mean, to be very honest, I think we're beginning to see a little bit of that, right? It lost its majority in Japanese parliament in both the upper house and the lower house during the most recent elections. And I think that was really a shock to the LDP. I think the fact that they lost a majority and it's going to be more difficult for them to pass bills now was something that they couldn't have predicted. In the backdrop of all of this, why the LDP is so unpopular right now among the Japanese public. I mean, there's several factors. One, of course, is a political slush fund scandal that came to light a couple of years ago, where politicians within the LDP were found to have not properly reported the income and the kickbacks they were receiving, right? And when the Japanese public found out, they were furious. Another scandal that hit the LDP was when the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's assassin, right, when he killed Abe, uh, it's found that some politicians within the LDP had fairly close ties, potentially, to the unification church, right? And again, that's something that the public wanted more information about, but didn't really get. So, there have been several issues that the LDP has faced. Some argue that the LDP has not properly addressed, for instance, the slush fund scandal. They dissolved the factions within the LDP, but some of the lawmakers that were found to have not reported those kickbacks are still within the LDP. They're still lawmakers, right? They didn't lose their roles. And I think when the public sees that, they say, "Where's the accountability? Where's the change that the LDP continues to say that they will implement? Continues to say that they're a new party, that they've turned a new leaf, but where is the evidence, the proof of that?" So I think the public is very frustrated with how the LDP is being run. And another factor, I think, that's contributed slightly to more recently to the LDP's unpopularity is a rise in more far right fringe populist parties, right? One very good example of that is the Sanseito. This party began during the pandemic. It's a very young party, but its leader is very charismatic. He's very good at speaking, public speaking. It started out actually as a YouTube channel, but it was just getting more and more popular. It also, I suppose, made its name promoting COVID-19 conspiracy theories. And right now, the Sanseito Party is very well known to promote anti-foreigner policies and anti-foreigner sentiment. Right, their whole slogan was "Japanese first." And they've talked about having stricter immigration policies and not having as many illegal immigrants enter Japan. And I think right now the Japanese economy it's bad, right? It's in a bad shape. It's in bad shape, and Japanese people feel like they're not earning enough. That just living in the country is very expensive. They can't afford the things that they could have 5, 10 years ago because of inflation. And they're thinking, what's happening? Why is the economy in such bad shape? What's going on? The Sanseito has said that, immigrants entering Japan, they're taking your jobs. They are contributing to Japan's very poor economy right now. If we reduce the number of illegal immigrants in Japan, then your jobs will come back to you. And also, public safety, that's a huge issue for them as well. And I think some voters actually, some voters believe the Sanseito. They do believe that with stricter immigration, the Japanese economy will improve again. And more of these voters have voted for the Sanseito, right? We saw that at the most recent local elections. The Sanseito won 14 seats, which was far more than any experts had predicted. And the LDP, after seeing those results, they scrambled. We saw Ishiba release a video about cracking down on immigration. And suddenly the LDP, even though it was not a campaign policy, not a campaign issue, was suddenly talking about stricter immigration. And then during the LDP presidency campaign, we also saw Takaichi talk about immigration as a huge hot button issue and how she was going to be stricter when it comes to immigration. So I think, whether or not the LDP continues to rule Japan, we're not going to be able to really see. I think Takaichi will be a really huge test because, again, this is a new coalition partner. This is the first female prime minister. This is the first time that the Abe era of conservatism has really come back to mainstream politics and within the LDP. So I think her test will really determine whether or not the LDP continues to rule Japan. It's a very long-winded long-winded answer, but I hope that makes sense.
So we have a very weakened party, an economy that's not doing well, populist right rising, their big security partners becoming, many consider, less reliable, and we have their big competitor, China, becoming ever more aggressive in places like the Senkaku Islands and threatening Taiwan. So why does she want this job? That's just sort of a joke. Um, how does she succeed is really the question.
I think, how does she succeed? That's a great question. I think if she's able to deliver on her promise about the Japanese economy, that will be huge. That will go down very well with the public. I think if she is able to tackle inflation and really increase Japanese people's real wages, right? Then I think the Japanese public will feel like, okay, the LDP, they're there for a reason. They ruled Japan for many, many years because we can rely on them. They really do deliver on their promise. I think that will be her biggest test. And then, of course, foreign policy, right? Her relationship with the United States, her relationship with China, how well she's able to maintain those ties will be quite important. Though I should mention, when it comes to China, the Japanese public has a very different view about China than it does about the United States. Um, People in Japan see China as a threat, right? 5, 10 years ago, public opinion polls show that Japanese people did not want to revise the Japanese Constitution's Article 9, which would make Japan's self-defense forces an actual army, right, with actual abilities to strike. They did not support that. Now, if you look at opinion polls, even from more left-leaning publications and TV channels, you see that the Japanese public is actually supportive of revising that constitution's article, right? They do support Japan leaving behind, getting rid of its more pacifist stance. And a huge, huge reason for that is because of China's rising threat. Also, what has, of course, perspired in Ukraine, right? The Russian invasion of Ukraine. That's also been a huge factor. So I think the economy, her relationship with the United States, at least under the Trump administration, and China, these three things will be very, very key in determining how long she stays in the job and how popular she'll be in the public.
All right. Well, Hanako, we're going to get you out of here on an exit question. And sometimes when I'm a little flummoxed as to what to ask, I ask AI because that's the thing to do in 2025. So here's what AI said I should ask you. So Prime Minister Takaichi reportedly, as you mentioned, is into heavy metal and even plays heavy metal drums to release stress. So as somebody who is an American living in Japan, who, although you speak Japanese, and have been there for a little while, I'm sure you have a stressful job covering all these intense political developments. What do you do to relieve stress?
What do I do to relieve stress? That's an interesting question, ChatGPT. What do I do to relieve stress? I read. I read fiction books. It's a nice escape from the world, I suppose. And I exercise, eat good food, and I sleep when I can.
It comes on podcasts.
Yes, and I join podcasts. It's a
And
multi-pronged
you
approach.
and you listen to every episode of the Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific podcast, sometimes twice. All right.
Yes.
Hanako, thanks so much. This has been a blast. I hope we have you on again.
Thank you so much.
And of course, our sponsor is Bauer Group Asia, a strategic advisory firm that specializes in the Indo-Pacific. Bauer Group applies unmatched expertise and experience to help clients navigate the world's most complex and dynamic markets. My co-host, Jim Carouso, is a senior advisor with Bauer Group, and of course, you can visit their website at bauergroupasia.com. Well, Jim, this is really, it is actually a pretty historic event there in Japan. They have crossed a threshold.
Well, as she said, Japan's a highly hierarchical and patriarchal society, and yet they have a female prime minister before the United States has had a female president. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
I was also interested in her comment that she admires Margaret Thatcher, who, of course, was the first female prime minister of Great Britain. And a Brit once told me that the reason she was so popular was because she reminded so many upper-class Brits of their nannies.
I don't know if a motorcycle riding, heavy metal playing prime minister is quite of the same stripe.
Well, it depends on your nanny.
Yeah, I guess so. But it is, as she mentioned, it is a really, and as you sort of set her up for, it's a really tricky period in Japanese history. I mean, things are kind of closing in on them a little bit with again, as you say, the rising China, the withdrawing, at least apparently withdrawing U.S. It's hard to tell exactly what we're doing, and the economic trouble.
Well, we didn't get into it with her, but she talked about a looser fiscal policy while managing inflation. Well, those are two contradictory policies right there. Cracking down on immigration while they have a demographic time bomb ticking where they
Yep.
just aren't producing enough people. So, yeah, that's a lot of circles to square.
Yeah, although it is very familiar to a lot of the things that we're talking about in the United States.
Ray? What do you mean? No, you're absolutely right. We have similar problems. Actually, most democracies seem to have similar problems these days.
Yeah,
That's a subject for another time.
it is indeed.
So, speaking of other times and other things, Ray, tell me a Japanese story.
All right. Well, so my one of my first assignments was in the military was to Japan. It was actually to Okinawa, which is a small island south of the main Japanese islands. But I did get up to the mainland and up to Tokyo once or twice. And the first time I did, I decided that I should do what you're supposed to do, what a wise man does, as according to Japanese tradition, which is to climb Mount Fuji. And so I arranged it with my friend, and we flew up together, and we went out to what's called Fifth Station, which is sort of where all the big tour buses park, and then the people get off the tour bus. Again, kind of the tradition is you do this at night. You do this before, right around sundown, in the summertime, because of course you can't climb Mount Fuji in the winter because it's all snowy. So you get let off there at Fifth Station and you start up the trail. And it is very commercialized. There are lots of places to stop and spend money. They'll put these little stamps on your Fuji stick, the thing that you buy at the gift store, to say that you hit different levels going up the mountain. You can spend lots and lots of money climbing Mount Fuji. And so we were doing that, and we were hiking along, and we saw up in front of us. So now we're standing there. We've got our Fuji sticks and we've got our handheld flashlights, and we see these four older Japanese women, and they have headlights on their, like the lights strapped to their heads. So they're older Japanese women with lights on their heads. So we figured these people clearly know where they're going. So we just decided to follow them. Well, after an hour of climbing up a shale slope, thinking to ourselves, is this what this is going to be like? I mean, we were like on our hands and knees thinking, this is miserable. We have to do this all night. We come to this lip where we kind of crest this little lip, and here are all these people walking by on the big, broad, wide trail up Mount Fuji.
So were they having you on?
So, so they were older Japanese women with lights on their heads. How could they get lost? That's
They're
why, they know what they're doing because they brought the lights on their heads, right?
maybe they did know what they were doing. You're the ones that didn't know what you were doing.
So, well, I will say, even though a wise man climbs Mount Fuji, the rest of the proverb is that a fool climbs it a second time, and you'll be happy to know that, of course, I have climbed it twice.
I would think nothing less of you.
I kind of think I'm twice as wise. Anyway,
Only a fool would say that.
exactly. Well, we have a little bit of a surprise for our audience. We've got some new bump music on the way out. I know everybody's used to our intro music, but we're going to try something a little different on the way out. Jim, what are we doing here?
All right, so I have two nephews who are musicians in New York. One works in a music studio, Dante and Thano. I said, can you write something for our podcast? And after careful consideration and much time, they produced what you're going to hear now.
All right, hit it, Ian. As I go into our outro. So our producer, of course, is the aforementioned Ian Ellis Jones and IEJ Media. He does our fantastic military and geopolitical graphics that everybody wants on X. In fact, I just asked him if I could use some of them for a story I submitted for a publication. So you'll want to follow him and get your share of those at Ian Ellis Jones on X. And of course, if you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and follow. I've got to tell you to do that, because if I don't tell you to do that, you'll forget. So you need to go ahead and subscribe and follow either on YouTube at youtube.com/IP Podcast or on your favorite streaming service. Of course, you can follow us on social media, which of course is X or Blue Sky or LinkedIn. And of course, you can email us, Indo-Pacific Podcast@gmail.com. I always say it twice, Indo-Pacific Podcast@gmail.com. Please, please, please visit our sponsor at BauerGroup.Asia.com for our new outro music. Thank you, Jim. Unky Jim, by the way. I just figured out that that's your nickname, Unky. Thank you, Unky. Thank you, Ian. This is Ray. Talk to you again next time on Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific?